Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. We're going to get you ready for Game 11 of Penn State's schedule this Saturday night. Nebraska comes to town. Senior day for Penn State, going to be honoring a couple dozen plus players who have been around this program for some time and a few that transferred in more recently. We're going to put some focus on that group to close out our segment together here, but we're going to give you our preview, predictions, practice takeaways. As usual, we were on the practice field Wednesday. We had our notebooks. I had offense. Daniel had defense. Mark had video highlights up. Grace Brennan with another fantastic photo gallery, and our video and takeaways from Terry Smith all over at Lions247.com. We're going to dive into that, a lot of that during this show. Nebraska 10-8 all time against Penn State. This is their first meeting since 2020 during that COVID shortened season. Penn State fell 30-23 in Lincoln that year. This is their first meeting in Beaver Stadium since what was a very wintry mixed kind of night against Nebraska in 2017. It ended up 56-44 Penn State. It was a game that they boat raced Nebraska. The Cornhuskers poured some points on late in that matchup. Another big-time performance. I think one of the final of them of Saquon Barkley in a Nittany Lions uniform. We're going to hear more about this Nebraska team. Also a little bit about Matt Rule and what they were hearing in Lincoln about a month ago when he was a relatively hot name on the hot board for Penn State with their coaching search. Brian Christopherson, an insider with the Cornhuskers who covers the team for 24/7 Sports, will hop on with us a little bit later in the show. If you missed our last show, we switched up our typical Wednesday lineup. Daniel joined me, Tyler Cavaruso joined me, and we took a lot of different angles on the coaching carousel. We started with James Franklin getting hired at Virginia Tech, the domino effect that's going to happen here for Penn State staff, which we're continuing to see in live time, what we anticipate to see on the recruiting trail and with this roster. And additionally, we focused on a few key names that have been particularly notable of late over on our hot board coverage at Lions247.com, which is now at 4.1 million views, 56,000 comments. It is a party going on. I think we're entering the final stretch. I believe we are now, and a lot happening over there. One of those names we discussed at length last episode is actually the subject of a pretty important note, I think, or at least an interesting note that we dropped earlier on Thursday at Lions247.com on that thread. It has stirred some conversation. We hope you're a part of it. If you're not, get on board, 30% off an annual subscription, or come on board for full price with a monthly deal, and you automatically get Paramount Plus access. So with all that said, let's get into our Penn State practice takeaways. As I said, we were over there at Haluba Hall. It's dusk around 4:45 now, unfortunately. So it feels like nighttime. It used to be late afternoon. And Daniel, we had a chance to hear from Terry Smith afterwards, as we always do. And he was pretty candid. You know, he's trying to focus on the task at hand. He repeatedly went back to saying the only thing that matters is beating Nebraska at any cost. He kept kind of ending answers with that kind of sentiment. But he also acknowledged, hey, we just had a big exodus from our staff as guys are disappearing and they're going to resurface in Blacksburg pretty soon, or they're already down there. And he understands that there is also a finish line to this season that approaches, and there's going to be a lot of questions about himself and the remainder of everyone who's still in the Lash building.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing that Haluba Hall is as spacious as it is, because there are a lot of elephants in the room when you talk about this program, where they are right now, things moving forward. And I think Terry Smith has done a really good job of handling all of this. I won't extend the metaphor by calling him the ringmaster of the circus. I don't think I can get through that with a straight face. But there's just a lot of different things going on right now. And I think that we're moving into the portion of it where it's not really like the emotional things anymore, that like it's actual structural things, that you are losing people from the building who, you know, you can say what you want that, you know, maybe the day that James Franklin was fired, all of these people knew that they were going to be wherever he was at his next stop, or they knew they wouldn't be at Penn State next year. But, you know, this was still an operation that was moving. Like, there is still recruiting happening. There are still visits that need to be had. And as Terry Smith, as the head man, it all falls on him. I think that, you know, he got the question about, you know, how much football have you done? That's been a theme that we've come back to a couple times with him. And he said that first week it was no football. Then over time it was a little bit more football. But now it's back to the point where it's not much football anymore, because you have to deal with all of these different things. And, you know, all these, and I guess, actual structural changes to the program that affects like the day-to-day, how things run. So I think that he's in an interesting spot right now. This program is entering in to an interesting spot now that you can really see the finish line, now that that big domino of James Franklin has fallen. And then on top of that, like Terry Smith said, you got to win a game on Saturday. That's really what it comes down to. I think that he's done a very, very nice job of reiterating that you can feel as good as you want. This can be a feel-good story. It can have a lot of emotion to it. You still got to go out there and win on Saturday. We know it's going to be an emotional day already because it is senior day. And it's also going to, I think, it won't be as interesting as it could have been, but you still got Matt Rule coming in, like a favorite son of State College coming home, which is another dynamic to things. So I think it was interesting to hear Terry Smith talk a lot. There wasn't a lot of injury updates from him yesterday. It was a lot of, these little tiny things that are on the head coach's plate.
And he actually equated these staff departures to injuries on the field. He said it's a next man up mentality. There's jobs that need to get done. He said it is my responsibility to make sure those voids are filled. And as we discussed following confirmation that Daniel was able to get on our last episode of the podcast, the most notable names that left the Lash building and have been there since day one, really, with James Franklin, Andy Frank, who has been the general manager of personnel and recruiting, and then chief of staff Kevin Threlko. They have a long history with James. As I said on the podcast a day ago, those would have been the names at the top of the list if you were projecting who was going to leave Penn State and landing at Virginia Tech. But several others, some guys that have done things behind the scenes. Aeneas Hawkins is one of them, a former Penn State defensive lineman who was working with player advancement and some revenue sharing strategy. Guy like Chris Mahone, known as Slim around the building, have enjoyed some interactions with him over the years. He's been an assistant recruiting coordinator. Just some names that we hope don't talk about here. The spotlight's not often on, but they've been a pretty important piece of the puzzle behind the scenes. And now they're moving on. Again, not all of them are officially on Virginia Tech's database yet, but we expect that to happen pretty soon. And Mark, as this is all happening and these maneuvers are going on, Terry Smith and a lot of these players continue to reinforce that they are focused on finishing this thing out on a 3-game win streak, putting themselves potentially in position to play a 13th game. We know there's a myriad of possibilities of what things may or may not look like come December. And yet Terry Smith very much trying to keep the tunnel vision inside that building to get through this matchup and then the next.
Yeah, he's prevented it from being a clown show, Daniel. How's that for your metaphors? The thing about the guys who left, the people who left, none of those are people who are directly impacting what happens on game day. That's not to say that they weren't all very important in compiling the roster and recruiting and everything else. But from an X's and O's perspective, I don't think you're going to see any impact whatsoever in terms of, and I don't mean that as disrespect to them. I think they would probably be the first ones to admit that, that all the key coaches for game day, for, when you're going out there on the field and who are going to be calling plays and talking to players and that sort of thing, they're all still here. And I think you give a lot of credit. I don't know what contracts are or whatever, but tons of credit to everybody who is staying, who has a hands-on role in what's going on. I think we all know that there are certain people who, once this season's over, we're not going to be very surprised to see them down at Virginia Tech. So I give all these people who are staying with the goal of helping these kids win games, these young players win games. I give them all the credit. And again, I mean, I don't know how much we can pray. I don't think it's enough what we could say positively about Terry Smith and the way he's keeping this all together. Yeah. I mean, this cannot be an easy thing for him to do, but he's doing it. And not only is he doing it, but he's doing it well. I mean, he's handling himself well. He keeps feeling a need to apologize for things that he doesn't have to apologize for. Number one, he didn't have to apologize for being emotional. Number two, he didn't have to apologize for not mentioning James Franklin. That's whoever thought he needed to apologize for not addressing the question about James Franklin after he got emotional about what he was going through. That's just petty to me. And then, finally, the stuff about Aliquippa, I think everybody understood where he was coming from. Right. I don't think he was dissing Al. Maybe it came across that way. So he needs to stop apologizing and just be the upfront, honest person that you are. That's my one criticism of him. Stop apologizing. Stop worrying about what people think. You're doing a good job and everybody knows it.
we heard a little bit of intel coming out of Penn State that there was also some really positive praise sent in his direction at a QB club event that took place on Wednesday, a bit of a luncheon or something of that nature where there's a gathering of some pretty important people within the Penn State community. And Terry Smith walks in the room and everyone just kind of acknowledges him in that moment, which is really cool.
Could I give a little bit more background on that, Tyler?
Of course you can.
Yeah, I mean, for people who have been around a long time, the quarterback club is something that happens every Wednesday. And typically the coach, whether it was Joe or O'Brien or Franklin, would go and talk. And typically they would have players who would go and talk. And at this one, I forget which player it was. Do you recall? Was it?
I think we were told Dominic Ruley.
Yeah, whoever. I mean, that's not really germane to it. But Terry was downstairs doing a radio hit with LeVar, or a video thing with LeVar. And as the player was talking, Terry came in, and that's when people gave him the standing O. And I don't mean to like talk over top of what you said, but I do think the context that everybody kind of stopped and like, oh, he's here. Yeah. And then gave him that round of applause was pretty cool. But that's like a well-known thing for old people like me who have been around. I'm not saying it's all old people at the quarterback club. A lot of good people go there, but it's always been a thing that they've done. And it's a place where the coaches could open up a little bit, but also that people who are around the program, when you're there, you could get a pretty good feel for the pulse of Penn State fandom, because it's a pretty hardcore group of fans who are there.
I'll have a story up on Friday at Lions247.com about a lot of players within this program, some former players within this program who are still with the team, basically vouching for Terry Smith's candidacy as remaining not just on the roster, but at least have a conversation with him if he wants to be the head coach, feel him out on that, Pat Kraft. There's a lot of that sentiment going on right now. And we'll have the story up at Lions 24/7. We'll get into a little bit more on the show. But yes, in case folks were wondering or concerned, Terry Smith, despite, having it lost in the shuffle of some of his answers on Monday, he has maintained contact with James Franklin. He said after practice, they talk essentially every other day. We had some reporting from down in Blacksburg yesterday where Audrey Snyder and John Sauber, our colleagues on the Penn State beat, they went down there for James Franklin's intro press conference. They were part of a small group that got a little bit extra with him after that press conference. And he actually said that Terry Smith was at his house up here in State College, just a couple of days ago, earlier this week. So they are maintaining that relationship. And it was kind of a two-pronged response because over the course of post-game interviews with Terry Smith, because on one hand, he acknowledged that James Franklin is a threat right now for Penn State. It was the question was, how much of a threat is James Franklin as a recruiter right now against Penn State? And Terry Smith said the most immediate threat is our locker room, guys leaving this program when they can to join him at Virginia Tech. And he said without a head coach, the most important thing that Penn State can do right now is protect its locker room. And he acknowledged just straight up, James Franklin has an advantage over Penn State when it comes to high school recruiting, because one school has a new, fresh, permanent head coach in place. The other school does not have a head coach in place. And, read between the lines, whatever you want, but there's some messaging in there that the sooner the better for Penn State to maybe stop the bleeding. There's a lot of guys that are visiting Blacksburg who are either committed or have been committed to this program. And at the same time, Terry Smith said, well, yeah, it's a possibility that I could end up joining James Franklin down at Virginia Tech myself. He said, everything's possible. He said, well, I want to focus on Nebraska and the Rutgers game, and then the business will get handled. And so it's a really interesting situation where Terry Smith doesn't have a straightforward answer from Pat Kraft, doesn't really know exactly where he stands right now, much less not in the head coaching search, but what his role would be if he were to be retained for the next head coach. I'm sure there's been dialogue there, but Terry Smith, I think, in some of his answers has been a truth teller in that regard about where things are a bit murky still. And Daniel, when we get into some other conversation beyond all the things happening behind the scene, all the things being juggled by this program right now, some significant injury updates, as you noted atop the show. A.J. Harris should be back, starting cornerback for the first 9 games. He went through pregame warmups after being listed as questionable at Michigan State, ultimately stuck to the sideline. That led to a first start and a lot of work for freshman Darius Dixon, which we covered earlier in the week. QB depth remains an issue. Jackson Smolik, who was phrased as week to week earlier this month by Terry Smith, we have not seen him at practice the last couple of weeks. And then Beckham Kritza, who was not available for the last couple of games. He was at practice, but his helmet was off for much of it. We didn't see him participating in drill work. So I think we're still in a situation where Liam Clifford is likely your projected QB2. And I think that just about covers it, aside from mentioning, again, Chaz Coleman, not at practice. That's the second consecutive week we haven't seen him at practice. He hasn't been available, announced as out prior to the last couple kickoffs. It is an injury situation, folks. It is a medical situation. I know people keep thinking like he's just lurking around Ohio State's facilities right now, waiting to enter the portal. I know people are freaked out and people are kind of like waiting for the next shoe to drop these days with Penn State, but that is not the case with Chaz Coleman. May he ultimately entertain a transfer? No doubt. I'm sure he'll have some suitors. That's the situation right now for Penn State. But Daniel, that's my long way of throwing it to you and saying those are kind of the player updates that we got regarding things that are tangibly going to impact Penn State come kickoff on Saturday night.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Chaz Coleman is that, like, there's an order of operations for some of this stuff. Like, with where we are right now, where we'll be in 2 weeks, where things will be 4 weeks after that. I know that it's easy to go straight to doom and gloom. And like you said, Tyler, there's we might end up where everyone thinks that we will, but we're not right there. And that's kind of, to quote Terry Smith, it's like, got to be where you are right now and, focus on Nebraska this week. But yeah, with those injury updates, I think AJ Harris coming back is really interesting, given that we saw Darius Dixon handle that full snap load, 47 out of 49 defensive snaps against Michigan State on the outside. Terry Smith had really good things to say about him. Jordan Lucas had really good things to say about him earlier Thursday. I think that, it's going to be interesting to see how that, timeshare works out. Early on, I think we thought that it was going to be Aldavian Collins and Elliott Washington in the rep split. But Aldavian Collins has been on the field a lot. Elliott Washington probably hasn't played as much as we maybe thought this year. And then AJ Harris got benched for the second half against Northwestern, has dealt with some injury stuff. And, there were a couple of sequences against Indiana where it was key points that he wasn't on the field. It was Dixon. So when we get to that post-game snap counts afterwards, it's going to be interesting to see, with Harris coming back from injury, how much he played and, maybe how much Dixon played, given how high everyone seems on him. As for the rest of the injury stuff, I think no Chaz Coleman. That opens that door for Ivan Kamaju to have another pretty big workload. He's averaging 23 snaps over the past 4 games. He's well past that redshirt threshold. Like we said, he was the guy in the winter that was getting all the buzz before Chaz Coleman showed up. So I think he's someone that you can keep an eye on too. And I don't think I need to reiterate my thoughts on Liam Clifford at number 2, at QB2. That's the situation Penn State is in, and they found a creative solution to I think a pretty tough spot in terms of quarterback depth, and we'll see.
Yeah. For more commentary on Liam Clifford, circle back to the Thursday episode that dropped before the Indiana game. I think we said all that needs to be said about him playing QB2 and where the QB room is there, and it kind of holds up still 2 weeks later. And so, by the way, we did get Ivan Kamaju after practice. We also got Alex Tash after practice. So for those keeping track at home, that is 3 freshmen available to reporter interviews in a 5-day span, when prior to that 5-day span, from the start of the 2014 season through last Friday, there were 0 true freshman interviews during the regular season. Something changed along the way. We all know that. We talked about Terry Smith putting his own stamp on this, and I was with Yvonne for about 5-6 minutes, pretty tight in terms of what he was going to say. It wasn't very effusive and kind of gushing about everything in his experience, but he basically discussed the role of Deion Barnes. He said he learned a lot from Torrance Brown early on, a former Penn State defensive end who ended up moving on for another job at another level of the sport since spring ball. And he discussed basically what he's learned from getting some game action. We have some of that commentary over at Lions247.com. But Mark, I'm a little more curious because the guy that we haven't talked about as much as Yvonne and Chaz, because they've had their moments of buzz over the course of the year and a little more spotlight on them here on the podcast. Alex Tash, what can you relay from that conversation? You were front and center for it throughout in the Holuba Hall on Wednesday evening.
If I could just say one thing really quick, we got a tweet. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it's pretty cool news that we set an all-time high in subscriptions today. As this is going on, Josh Harvey, our tier leader, let us know. So gigantic thank you to the Penn State fans who made this happen. Tyler, great job by you leading up the coaching search stuff. And we could not do it without the network. I mean, the people, Doan, everybody else who has our back. I mean, this is just for us to get there. It's big. You know, I'm not going to downplay that. And it speaks as much to, I think, our community as it does to anything else. So I just wanted to.
I mean, we're covering a 4-6 team. It's November 2025. And we're talking about having more subscribers at Lions247.com than at any other point in the site's existence. And that's huge. Thank you for bringing it up. I did not see the text at this point, but I'm happy you interrupted whatever I was going on with the freshman linebacker for a second. That's great.
Well, you mentioned a 30% off special. I'm just telling you. I think most people know there's another special that's coming up in a week on a certain day. That's usually a big day. So for us to get here now, I think is pretty cool. And the vast majority of them are annual. So just very cool. And, you know, I think it speaks to the work everybody does. So I'll let it go at that. And let's get back to talking football. So people know these media availabilities, and they're actually really cool. They started doing them a couple of years ago when we asked for more player in-person access. So after Terry talks, and it had been James before, they'll bring out 3 or 4 players, and it's scrum style, which means they're standing out there on the field with people kind of around them. Now, I say that because when you mention Yvonne, it's not the easiest thing to do your first time. And I give these young kids all the credit in the world for coming out and doing it, because you're basically surrounded by big goofs like me and, you know, many smaller people than me, but everybody's kind of right there. And, you know, a lot of very professional people who have asked a lot of questions, and some young student reporters. And it's a mix. I'm not being critical of anybody, but for them to come out and do that I think is pretty cool. And to see Dixon do it after the game the other day was really cool, because that's a whole different ball game. But with respect to Tatch, I mean, he talked about, we were wondering what happened to him, right? I mean, out at that UCLA game, it's like we had been hearing all this stuff about, you know, how well he was playing. He was demoted down to the foreign team, the D team they call it. He believes it was prior to the Oregon game, and he said it was a little bit of a hit, but you have to keep grinding away, and he did, and things started to go slower for him. And I think it's really cool that in this day and age, these kids were all superstars in high school. You know, no matter how many stars they had, they were all it.
Yeah.
And to come in here and, you know, people are talking you up into preseason, and people are talking you up early in the season. And then, you know, your ego takes a little bit of a hit. He didn't let that bother him at all. He kept grinding away, said things got slower, and within time, and I think it also corresponded with the coaching change, he started to see more reps. And he talked about how Knowles did simplify things, and how having all those not all those veterans, but the couple of veterans they have in Campbell, who I guess from what Tatch was saying, previously played in a system that was similar to what Knowles had. So he's the one guy, I think, who has grasped it better than anybody. And I think the results have probably shown that. But also having Dom DeLuca. Again, what have we talked about with Dom DeLuca? You know, yeah, he struggled at times, but the ultimate team player. This guy's taking snaps away from Dom DeLuca, and Dom DeLuca's teaching him. That's what you need to know about Dom DeLuca. So pretty cool. Then I also had a chance to ask him about breaking his face mask, and I don't think he had the appreciation for it that most people do. He was like, he's like, are people talking about it? I'm like, yeah, your coach talked about it on a radio show.
What did Terry call it last night? He said we called them bone crushers.
Bone crushers, yeah. So this kid did that at Ohio State. He broke his face mask, and he was like, I was more annoyed because I had to come off the field, and I never knew what would happen if that happened. But so that was pretty cool. But he handled himself extremely well. And we'll put some video up at some point, I think, of both of those kids, especially Tatch. I was there for him. Grace wasn't there yesterday. She was over at Hoops. So we'll get some more of that up so you get a feel for what some of these kids are all about.
Basketball team, 5-0, folks. By the way, we don't talk about them much here on the podcast.
Enjoy it.
But there's plenty of coverage at Lions247.com. Daniel was there. Grace was there. We're still covering that team. They're off to a good start. So check that out if you have interest in hoops. And by the way, Terry Smith was really, really vocal in his feelings about Alex Tash when asked about him yesterday. He said his development has been tremendous. He's going to be one terrific player here. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, he's smart. He's being tutored by one of the greatest in Penn State history in Dan Connor. He's going to be a great one for us. So another name to track there. And you're right, Dom DeLuca went from a 99% snap share for about 3 games while Alex Tash is, working his way off the scout team again to now probably about 70% of a snap share more recently. And Tash has been cutting into that. We've seen some Keon Wiley as well. And a man who needs no introduction as we kind of get introduced to these freshmen a little bit is outgoing senior Drew Allar. He's among the men.
Can I do one more Tash point before we get into Drew?
24/7, baby. Tash 24/7.
He had Max Ralph from Penn Live asked him a pretty good question where Tash is up at the 4-game threshold for burning his red shirt, and I assume it seems like he's going to play this weekend based on the way that he was talking, the way that they made him available to speak to us. There's no guarantee of a bowl game where he can just wait and then play again. Like, these are important reps for him right now. And so Max asked him kind of about the process of deciding to go forward with this, because to some people's dismay, I think James Franklin erred on the side of, we're going to preserve these red shirts. We want to give these guys as much time to develop, as much time in college as possible. Where with Tash, seemed like I don't think anyone would blame him if it was like, yeah, I'll pack it in and we'll see where things are in terms of a new coach, like all 4 years left, wherever I end up, even if it's at Penn State. But he said that he talked to Terry Smith, talked to Dan Connor, and he said they've told him it's a good idea, and quote, "I just can't see them steering me wrong here. I trust them." So I think that's a pretty big endorsement too, when you talk about the way this coaching staff is operating, the way they're going about things, and a little bit of an interesting subplot. I don't think anyone else is really on the same pivot point as Tash. Everyone's either, they're past it or they're not going to hit it. So for him to be right there, I thought that was another interesting part, of his season.
Yeah, you're looking at Chaz Coleman, Darius Dixon, Yvonne Kamaju, and Kobe Howard as the freshmen have burned red shirts thus far. I think you're right. I don't think we're speaking with Alex Tash a few days before the Nebraska game if he's going to be a spectator for that game. So we'll see if it's all systems go and he gets involved there early on Saturday evening. As I said, going from freshmen who were just starting to kind of match faces to names right now to a guy that we've been interviewing on this podcast since he was about 16 years old back at Medina High School in Ohio. Drew Allar stepped up to the microphone with us during a Zoom call on Thursday morning. And I just want to stress how much we appreciate this, because in the history of covering Penn State here for me, I think PJ Mustipher is the only other guy who's been dealing with a season-ending injury or really any type of injury in that moment who was available to us. And then that happened with PJ toward the end of the 2021 season. He was kind of a, will he leave? Will he use that COVID eligibility? He ended up sticking around in 2022, but PJ was that gregarious personality, one of the best guys we've dealt with in interview sessions. And he wanted to give us that opportunity and give himself an opportunity to speak in an interview setting before he finished off. Now, Drew Allar's situation is much different. You think about what he dealt with in his final weekend in a Nittany Lions uniform, being an active player, has a serious ankle injury late in a devastating loss to Northwestern. He's confirmed as out for the season by his head coach. That's one of the final answers that head coach ever gives as Penn State's as Penn State's leader. James Franklin's in the hospital with Drew Allar in his room that Saturday night. James Franklin is then fired and shown the exit door the next afternoon. And just think about how Drew Allar is internalizing all this. The guy who was brought to campus, widely considered the player who was hand in hand with James Franklin to take the program to the next step. They achieved a lot together. And when we had a chance to hear from Drew, and again, thanks so much to him for stepping up. He didn't have to do it. No one forced him to do it. But hearing from him, I brought it up, and it wasn't fun to discuss, but looking back at that weekend, and he described it as, quote, "It was a very fast flip of the switch. Honestly, it still doesn't feel real to some extent." And Daniel, I know you're far more familiar with the quotes from Drew because you transcribed them and put them on our board, and you already have a story up on him kind of relaying where he stands in his injury progress and what he's working through right now to try to get ready for next year and the ability to improve as a quarterback moving beyond Penn State. What were your top takeaways from Allar?
I think on top of that, talking about that weekend, I think he called it one of the worst, if not the worst weekends of his life, which, I think that really stood out to me when you talk about the emotional swing that happened. On top of, Franklin being at the hospital Saturday night, Allar said that he was in the team meeting back at the facility on Sunday. And we know that he had surgery later that week. I think just a pretty big whirlwind for someone in that position. My big takeaway from Allar, in terms of just big picture, was that he seemed very confident in himself. He seemed very at ease, in good spirits, talking to us. He seemed optimistic about his health moving forward. He said his surgery was successful. His left ankle. He's going through his rehab. Would not put a timeline on it. He got asked a couple times about, will you be back for the combine? Will you be back? Could you be back for Senior Bowl? Different things. And I think that he, wisely said that, he's not going to put anything out there because you can have setbacks, you can get ahead of schedule, and you don't want to marry yourself to a certain day, because if you don't hit that date, questions start happening, like creates more problems for you. But I thought also he had a little bit of a sense of humor about things. I know that some of the things were a little macabre in terms of the end of his career, how it ended, moving on. But he had some smiles, he had some chuckles. Like, I think that there was a self-awareness about a little bit of like the absurdity, of the situation, that we thought that at this point Nebraska would be coming in here and this would be a Penn State team trying to, maybe with 2 losses, trying to fight for, to get into the playoff picture, or maybe with 1 or 0 losses and looking to assert themselves as, a top 4 team, one of the best teams in the country. And quarterback's hurt, coach is gone. Everything's different. And so I think that he had really good perspective. He talked about his relationship with James Franklin, helping Ethan Grunkemeyer. And I think overall, one of the other big takeaways is that, in the long term, this might be something that you look back on and it was good for Drew Allar in a way where he's able to take a step back, able to look at the game through a different perspective. He said that he feels like he can't stay away. He feels like he owes it to his teammates to be there. But also, I thought it was a little bit insightful that he said that, selfishly, he's still around for himself, that he still wants to be around the team, that he loves football. Like, this is what he wants to do. This is what he's about. So I thought it was, it's probably the last time we talked to Allar as a Penn State athlete. And I thought that he, represented himself pretty well, represented the school well. And I think that, he did get some of those big picture questions about, like, how did everything end up here? Where did it go wrong? He was very hard on himself in that, where he shouldered a lot of that responsibility. But
what did he say? He said, I left plays out there, right? Is that he said that a few times.
Yeah. And he said too that, maybe he makes some of those plays and maybe they still don't win or things like that. But he feels that if he makes those plays, in some ways, everything would be different. So I think that that's someone who, from day one, I think has been very aware of the role of like the franchise quarterback, someone who embraced that and lived it. And now is ready to move on and come what's next. But I think is very aware of how this will have shaped him.
Mark, put a punctuation on this part of the podcast for us with Drew. Mention what you saw when we walked into Holuba Hall last night, and if you have anything else to add on top of what Daniel and I just discussed.
Yeah, Drew was in a cart, which I guess it allows you to move around a little bit more easier than those high-tech crutches we saw him on out at Michigan State. But he had his blue practice jersey on, which, to me tells you all you need to know. I think Daniel hit on most of it, but the one enduring thing I'll have of Drew now is that I think he, more than anybody, kind of personifies this senior class not giving up on the team. Terry mentioned it, was it yesterday or Monday? I forget which day, about, he easily could have gone and just started preparing for whatever, obviously he can't run and whatnot, but I'm sure he could do other stuff.
And we've seen guys do that in past years, especially in this current climate of college football, where guys well, my career's done. Peace. I'm out. Yeah, it happens.
And so remember a couple weeks ago, I made the ridiculously unbold prediction that Terry Smith would get the loudest round of applause. I'll bet you Drew Allar is going to get the loudest round of applause on senior night, just because people understand what he's gone through. And yeah, people may have been booing him on the field as things were winding down, but if you can't respect what this whole end of things is about. I mean, he's traveling with the team, and he's not just traveling and just like hanging out. I mean, he's out there on the field. He's talking to Grunk. He's helping Grunk. He's talking to Danny. I mean, he's in the middle of kind of everything. At Michigan State, he was jawing with the fans. It was fantastic. You know, it's a side of him I never really saw. I've seen him jawing with players, but like in a fun way. So yeah, that to me, the stuff as a player, we all know what he's all about. You know, very gifted guy, sometimes struggled in big games, but as I look at it now, I'm thinking, wow, did this guy show leadership at a time when the program really needed leadership? And I give him all the credit in the world. And I think that speaks to him. I think it speaks to his parents. I think it speaks to everybody who's coached him along the way, including James Franklin.
Yeah, agreed. And he says he's been conversing with Franklin probably every other day. And I think he said, since we've both been done, is the way he phrased it. And so we appreciate, again, the candid nature of the conversation and just the fact that we got to have the conversation. I did kind of reach out directly to Drew about that through some Penn State people, and I know that he understands the way we appreciate that. And so we'll put a pin in it there, but you can go over to Lions247.com. Daniel has a story up. I don't think it'll be the last story we write about Drew coming off this conversation. I know there's some video available as well, so you can kind of place yourself into that interview a bit if you'd like as well. One other interview we got on Thursday morning, we'll keep this one brief, but Daniel, at least tease some of the stuff that we have over at Lions247.com, because you referenced Jordan Lucas earlier in the show, and I think there were probably some listeners, some viewers who were like, wait, who? The former Penn State cornerback? What are we talking about him? Former Penn State cornerback, former NFL defensive back for a while in the league. He has been the cornerbacks coach in place of Terry Smith since Terry Smith stepped up as the interim head coach. He had been working under Terry's direction on the practice field, now a little bit more in that spotlight. And he got emotional, just like Terry did a few days ago, in talking about the interim head coach and his impact, not just on Lucas as a rising figure in the coaching world right now, but as a guy who was wearing that Nittany Lions uniform, trying to find his own path in the sport.
Yeah, we talked to Jordan Lucas for, I think it was more than 17 minutes on today, which I think is one of the longer conversations we've had with an assistant coach this year. I went back because I was trying to remember how he got to this point, but he originally came on and was supposed to be in a recruiting role, but then they had a GA spot open up, so he switched over to become a graduate assistant. Was the assistant cornerbacks coach and is now running the cornerbacks room with Terry Smith taking over as the interim. Jordan Lucas, like as someone who was here at the beginning of the James Franklin era, he talked a lot about, bridging the eras. It was a very all-encompassing, big picture conversation about like the history of Penn State football, because he is someone who was recruited by Joe Paterno. I think he said he was the first one to commit or sign with Bill O'Brien. I don't know if you can check that, Mark. But so he was there for O'Brien, then he's there for Franklin getting hired, and now he's here for Franklin getting fired. So he's really seen it all, of this program. And there are a lot of, big picture conversations with him that, went beyond my knowledge. I've only been here for 5 years. So it was really interesting. And then, so I don't go too long, I'll just end with the emotion that he had talking about Terry Smith. I shared the clip on social media. I asked him, how do you go from being like the pupil to the peer and how that relationship changes? And Jordan Lucas said that, their relationship for the past 13 years has been exactly the same, and that he views Terry Smith as a father figure. Terry Smith was one of the first people that he texted after he had a child, and he got choked up in terms of talking about how he loves Terry Smith. At the very end, he got asked by Ali Barubi from ABC 27, kind of what's the pitch for Terry Smith to be the head coach. And, he gave a very, eloquent, Terry's a Pennsylvania guy. He's Penn State through and through. The players love him. He'll do anything for the players, all of that. But I've been doing this for a long time, hearing guys talk, and I'm pretty dispassionate, I feel like, but I started to get some goosebumps. Jordan Lucas says, quote, hearing him speak in the locker room and talk to these guys, the way he has their ear, the way he has their attention, I'm so jealous. I am so jealous because I want to play for him so bad again. Just one more time, just one more time. And then he started, tearing up again and crying. And that was pretty powerful to hear from someone who played in the NFL, has a Super Bowl ring, has done a lot in his career, is back, wants to be a coach now, and has Terry Smith as a mentor. It was pretty cool. I think I'm going to have a full Q&A of that up on Lions 24/7 soon.
Good stuff out of you. And there's been some goosebumps this week in general. And there's been a lot to talk about. Don't think I realized how much we had to talk about until we actually sat down and started talking. And so let's kind of start to work our way towards the end of this segment. We got a little while.
There is a game.
Yeah, there is a game. And you're going to learn more about Nebraska coming up in our second segment. We got a pretty long episode for you here on a Thursday. But considering it's a 7 p.m. kickoff on Saturday, some of you might be tailgating, you might be driving into town. I hope that the longer episode is appreciated because we did want to bump some things back in the week to bring you the coaching carousel conversation on Wednesday. And so without further ado, let's jump into that a little bit because Terry Smith acknowledged that there are similarities between what the Nebraska offense wants to do, what the Penn State offense wants to do, and essentially what both defenses will be dealing with in this matchup on Saturday evening. Both of these teams, guys, want to protect a young quarterback with limited experience. Both of these teams lost their starting quarterbacks who were former 5-star players who came into the season with a ton of hype. Both of those guys are not available at that position now for them. And each of these teams have had success on the ground. We've talked about a lot what Kaytron Allen has been able to do, especially lately with the team leaning on him more. They have an incredible running back that we're going to get into down the road here on this episode at Nebraska. But the goal is the same, Mark, where you want to be able to establish yourself on the ground, maintain long possessions. This feels like it could be a relatively low-scoring matchup based on what we've seen lately from these two respective teams. And it almost feels like whoever can force that young quarterback, it's a true freshman on one side, a redshirt freshman on the other, whoever can force that guy to make more mistakes, more mental errors perhaps in the heat of the moment, is the team that's going to come out with the win.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, Latif obviously can run if he needs to, but the way this Penn State defense has been playing the last couple games, would they want to subject him to that? It's one thing running around like a crazy man at UCLA or against UCLA. It's another thing the way that these guys are playing and hitting quarterbacks like guided missiles. I mean, they beat the what out of Mendoza, and he's as savvy as they come. I just have to wonder, how that's going to work. So I think the edge that Penn State has is that they do rely on Grunk a little bit, maybe to keep drives alive, but I don't think it seems to me as if this kid, they're going to need him to run the ball more. I know he's been extremely accurate, but he hasn't faced great defenses and he hasn't thrown a ton of passes. So I think the edge Penn State has is that their offense in general, I think, is geared to do well with the running game without having to worry about a quarterback who's going to carry a huge part of the load. And I mean, we saw that when they ran passed two times, in the second half against Michigan State. And one of them wasn't even really a pass. I mean, it was basically a little pitch, handoff type thing. So I think that actually bodes well. I know I'm kind of foreshadowing my pick in this game, but I think this should work out well if Penn State plays with common sense on offense and does what we saw it do against Michigan State. Maybe use some deep balls early to keep the defense honest and then let your ground game and your offensive line take over the way it did.
Daniel, when you look at the combination of the way Penn State's been pressuring the opposing quarterback the last 120 minutes of football, it's been at a much different level than we saw at any point. They had a season-high 5 sacks against Michigan State. Mark referenced the fact that they gave Mendoza a lot of hits, sent him home with some bruises, I'm sure, back to Bloomington. And then you think about the last time this Nebraska team was in the spotlight for a lot of Penn State fans, that Friday night game against Minnesota early on in the coaching search. They gave up 9 sacks that night, I believe the number was. And so their offensive line has had struggles, although they've been able to establish the run with authority a lot lately, but protecting a young quarterback, a true freshman, entering this environment. And we'll get into what we think Beaver Stadium is going to be like in just a moment. That would seem to be an edge for Penn State. What to me is ultimately which of these teams can get their running back going and really putting out chunk yards and putting the other opposing defensive tackles and defensive ends on their back heels early and often. That could be the determining factor in who takes control of this game.
Definitely. I think you look at someone like Denai Dennis Sutton, who has turned it on these past couple of weeks and has, I think, looked like the potential first-round talent that a lot of us thought he would be coming into the year. I think that you look at the way that he has, maybe found his footing or unlocked something lately. I think he's someone that can, wreck a game. I think we really did see that against Michigan State. On top of that, these cornerbacks, when they come off the edge, and these safeties like King Mack, they are guided missiles. They can really lay the wood. They're a physical group. They're playing really hungry. I think that they have all the tools they need to turn this into turn this Nebraska offense into a one-dimensional group. That one dimension might be pretty good though with Emmett Johnson, but I think that Penn State is in a good situation to land some punches early and dictate, okay, Nebraska, this is how you're going to have to play the game.
And I mentioned earlier, just a moment ago, I think the Beaver Stadium crowd is going to bring it. When you think about a 4-6 team toward the end of the year, they've already fired their coach. Externally, you'd probably think that that's not going to be much of an atmosphere. But we experienced what it was like in Indiana, or when Indiana came to town a couple Saturdays ago. And now the team has a win under its belt. And all these fans got to experience something they haven't seen in a while from the Nittany Lions team. Pure joy. Everyone saw what happened on the sideline post-game with Terry Smith, how this team was kind of galvanized in that moment. And I think that's going to be reflected in the way people show up before kickoff, the way they react to the senior day ceremonies, and the way that when these teams actually line up across each other and there's momentum swinging moments. Mark, I think this is going to potentially be as good of an environment that you've ever seen for a 4-6 football team in a chilly late November game.
Well, the one thing I would be a little nervous about is are students going to cut out a little bit early for the holiday? I don't know, but I do think we saw it. I mean, we saw it for the Indiana game, right? I mean, the fans came, and I was frankly surprised by how many fans were there and how into it they were. Now, obviously, that was at the beginning of the game. When it became a game, when it was very close down the end, that didn't surprise me whatsoever. But yeah, I mean, I think as evidenced by our own good fortune, I think the fans are still invested in this team and want to see it do well. And I think something has to be said for the senior class, right? I mean, I think they deserve to go out with even though things didn't go the way they went. I go back to what I said about Drew Allar. For all these guys to stick with it, I think they deserve to have a really good crowd there for this game.
Yeah, let's talk about our players to watch. We'll get into our predictions immediately after that. And Daniel, let's begin with you. Who's the Nittany Lion in the spotlight for a Saturday night showdown?
I'm going to go with Amari Campbell at linebacker. This Nebraska running game has been really good past couple of weeks. Don't think their back is going to really have enough to enter the Heisman conversation, but he's been really good this year. I had that UCLA game on whenever that was a couple weeks ago. That was really fun to watch, and I thought he did some really good things. He can take the pressure off that quarterback. They let that quarterback throw a little bit more against UCLA, and he was throwing to the running back. He was making some things happen. So I think Campbell is going to be really key in terms of knowing what's going on, getting guys in the right spot, and then making some plays.
Mark, who's your player to watch?
Daniel took my guy, so I am going to go with Zakee Wheatley. I think very similar. Here's a guy who in his career has been outstanding against the run, great tackler. Just final game, I think he's really going to bring it and get the job done. He's played really well all year, one of the bright spots over there on defense, and I think he's ready to have a big game. Double-digit tackles for Zakee Wheatley, which isn't always a good thing when a safety has it, but I think in a game like this, when you're maybe creeping him up toward the line, it won't necessarily be a bad thing. And maybe use him as a spy a little bit, just in case. I know when they were trying to use linebackers as a spy, it wasn't really going well. And then, I'd also throw out Zakee's my guy. But I would not be surprised if this is the kind of game where King Mac does some good things on defense. Maybe some blitzing, whatever. He's the kind of guy who likes to be in the middle of a fray, and I think this is going to be a fray of a game, if you get my drift.
Things have been going as well as we've seen defensively for Penn State the last couple games, and I think you can say that King Mac the last 2 games is as good as he's been at the college level against the run, and also a really impressive interception against Indiana. I'm also going to go with a defensive player. I'm going to circle back to one of those freshmen, Darius Dixon. I know A.J. Harris is expected to play. I think he'll probably be in the starting lineup. But right now, it doesn't seem like Darius Dixon is the kind of guy you keep on the sideline for long stretches. There's a lot of people looking around this building right now and Lash and being like, this guy's onto something. This guy is making moves. And so I'm curious if he can get around the ball again. He had a strip sack against Indiana a couple of weeks ago. He scooped up a fumble last week. He's also been an exceptional open field tackler when given those opportunities, and open field tacklers against a running back like Emmett is going to be very important for this team. So I'll go Darius Dixon. I think he's going to get a boatload of snaps again, get a lot of work, and make an impact once again in that secondary. Just since you brought up Zachary Wheatley, I think I referenced this earlier on the week, but he has missed 7 total snaps through 7 Big Ten games, and they were all against UCLA. And our understanding was that was just to deal with a cut on his face. That was to deal with like a laceration on his face. And so other than that, if Penn State has been playing defense, number 6 has been roaming the field at safety, which is incredibly Iron Man kind of performance. And when you talk about the physicality in Big Ten football, let's get to our score predictions, bold predictions, and Mark, you lead us off this time.
Yeah, I mean, as you look at this game, we probably thought it was going to be a QB battle to some extent at the beginning of the season, but now I think it's completely, been flipped on its head. I think whatever team is able to better establish the run and defend a run is going to be the team that wins. With Penn State, we saw how they were able to establish the run, albeit against a not great rush defense at Michigan State. Statistically, Nebraska's rush defense is even worse. And then for the Penn State rush defense, you look at what they've done the last couple games, and you give up one long run against Michigan State and then basically shut that ground game down the entire time. And then what they did against an Indiana team that was coming off a game where it rushed for 800 yards or something. I think they have really gotten dialed in as they've simplified things, implemented the Prowler package. So as well as Emmett Johnson is playing, I think Penn State is going to have the advantage on both sides, but it's still going to be a real close game. Penn State is going to win 28-21. My bold prediction, I know I said that they can't afford to run Ethan Grunkemeyer too much, but he's going to become the first Penn State quarterback to have a rushing and passing touchdown in a game since Drew Allar in the Oregon Big Ten championship game last year. Don't think it's going to be some sort of long run. I think maybe they're in a goal-to-go situation, and they fake it to Katron, and he maybe, bootlegs into the end zone, and I think he'll get himself at least one passing touchdown. So going out on a little bit of a limb, more than my Terry Smith gets the biggest round of applause pre-Indiana.
13 consecutive games without a quarterback scoring in both ways, getting a touchdown in both ways is a pretty long time. We'll see if that is snapped, and you're right again. Daniel, what do you have for us?
Yeah, my bold prediction is a game flow prediction. So I'll lump everything together. I think the environment at Beaver Stadium is going to be excellent on Saturday night. I know that some people in our industry like to use the term casuals as derogatory, when talking about fans. But I think that this is a game for the casual fans, that they are coming to see their seniors. They are not like most people in that stadium are not worried about Chaz Coleman and what he's going to do when the season ends. Like, they're there to watch the team. They're there to, get there, tailgate, scream, for however many hours. And I think that's really going to come through, for Penn State. I think they're going to ride that emotional wave to a 14-0 lead in the first quarter. But like we've said, this is a flawed team. We've seen it all year. We even saw it a little bit in that win over Michigan State last week. So I think Nebraska will reel them back in. 14-14 game going into half. Terry Smith has a conversation about what the offensive identity should be, and then they just pound Nebraska the rest of the game. I have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen combining for 150 rushing yards in the second half. Penn State pulls away for a 30-17 victory over Nebraska.
Sounds like a familiar script last Saturday in that regard, Daniel. I also am going with the Penn State victory. I think they're going to duke it out a bit with Nebraska and dueling rushing games. I think both of these teams will find success on the ground. I think both of these teams will have some long drives that take big chunks of time, maybe half of a quarter, something like that. I think there are going to be a finite amount of opportunities in this game to possess the football because of that. So a turnover or two can make the difference. I think that will make the difference. As I mentioned earlier, Ethan Grunkemeyer versus TJ Lateef. I think Lateef ends up with more marks against him in the mistake category, and that ends up nudging it towards Penn State's favor. I also think a key thing along the way will be Nebraska getting into the red zone or near the red zone and not be able to get to the end zone. And so I think it's going to be kind of a field goal heavy performance for the Nebraska offense. That leads me to 24-16 victory for Penn State, setting up a play-in opportunity to get to a postseason game in Piscataway against Rutgers the following Saturday. And my bold prediction, I think a couple of off-season transfer pickups step up in the final game for Beaver Stadium. One of them, it's his final college game. Trevor Pena scores his first touchdown against Big Ten competition. You got to go back to non-conference play the last time he reached the end zone. And he's been on a roll right now. He had almost 100 receiving yards against Indiana. He was pretty hot early at Michigan State, too, had a 20-some yard pickup before they just shut down the passing game and focused on the run after halftime. And the other part of that is Amari Campbell. I think he surpasses his collective conference sack total on this night alone. He has 1.5 sacks on the season in Big Ten action thus far. I think he gets at least 2 sacks against Nebraska. So that's what we've got for you on the Penn State end. As promised, you can stick around for another conversation coming up after this quick break on what we expect from Nebraska with one of the Cornhuskers insiders. But boys, I appreciate the conversation as always. I will see you in Beaver Stadium for one final time in 2025. Penn State trying to win its first game in that stadium since mid-September. So we'll see what happens. We'll be there early. We'll be there afterward. And I think by now you know to follow our coverage at Lions247.com. Record high. Thanks for breaking that news, Mark. I'll talk to you both really soon. This Lions 24/7 podcast episode continues with focus on Penn State's next opponent. The Nittany Lions will welcome in a 7-3 squad for a Saturday night showdown in Beaver Stadium. Matt Rhule comes back to town, former Nittany Lions player, leading the 7-3 Nebraska football squad. Of course, Rhule was a name that we discussed a lot early on in this coaching search process. He has agreed to a contract extension a few weeks ago to remain the head coach in Lincoln for the foreseeable future. We're going to get a breakdown of where this team stands. They had a quarterback injury they're dealing with. What have been the highs? What have been the lows? And what kind of talent are they bringing to Happy Valley this weekend? To help us with that, we tap into our 24/7 Sports Network and bring in a Nebraska insider. Brian Christopherson joins us right now on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Brian, good to get you on board. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, glad to be here, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to having you in our press box. Hopefully you'll have a good trip from your neck of the woods over to ours this upcoming weekend. We got a good game brewing on Saturday. Suddenly there's a pulse to this Penn State team. They took Indiana down to the wire. They came away with an 18-point victory over Michigan State. And I know Nebraska is coming off a bye week. So let's start there before we get into some of the other stuff. And we'll definitely talk about Matt Rhule. But what were the kind of points of emphasis that you would consider for Nebraska during their weekend away from football action, maybe some things that they're trying to finish off stronger than what they've shown thus far?
Yeah, I think a big thing was getting healthy. They'd played 6 weeks in a row, and against UCLA just before the bye, like their lead jack linebacker, senior Dasan McCullough, who they brought over from Oklahoma last year, he didn't play, and now he's healthy and ready to go. And there's a couple guys who were dinged up. Their O-line has been really battered throughout the year, and they've lost some to season injuries. But getting those guys back, I think, was big. And then, of course, with as I know we'll get to them, but with the freshman quarterback and TJ Lateef, I think just any extra time where you can get some reps and sort of build off your first data point from your first start is useful. And so I think that was probably the biggest thing. And then, of course, as you know, getting some recruiting done for this staff. There's that big picture look that's always going on in the middle of a season too.
Let's talk about Matt Rhule because he was the name that was the easiest to kind of connect point A to point B when this Penn State job came open. He's a State College high school graduate, guy who has a personal relationship with the athletic director here in Pat Kraft, and also has professional history with him at a previous university. And so it was very easy to say, yeah, he's got to be on the hot board. He may be one of the top candidates. Of course, then as everyone here in the Nittany Lions community is focusing in on him and his Nebraska team, they have a clunker, 24-6 loss at Minnesota that Friday night. And I can tell you, our board, at least, I have not been downvoted as much as on our board than when I went on there and I said, hey, there's some board of trustee members who would really like to see Matt Rule back in town. People were getting their pitchforks out. They were not happy about the situation. They felt like if Pat Kraft was going to hire what they consider to be his buddy, they weren't going to be fired up about that after what they saw Nebraska put on the field. Obviously, there's been better days since then for the Cornhuskers. They're working through some things right now from an injury standpoint at quarterback. But what were you hearing early on when the Penn State job opened about Matt Rule's interest, about Nebraska's concern, before you got word of the contract extension? What was kind of the talk around Lincoln about where things could be headed or potentially the threat of him leaving and coming back to his alma mater?
Yeah, people are definitely anxious about it here. I understand from Penn State's perspective where they're looking at like his record against top 25 teams and all that stuff and how that conversation on the other end was going. From Nebraska's end, if you think about the last at least 11 to 12 years since the Bo Pelini era ended in 2014, it's just been disjointed without a planner, like without like a real purpose. So like where you felt like somebody in the captain's chair sort of, at least this is where we want to go. And it's well laid out. And I think Rule's good at that. Having a plan and presenting it. And so I do think people were worried about, the possibility of blowing that up. And really they knew that he liked it here, but there was always that one school, of course, your alma mater and home, which can tug at you. But one of his early press conferences, he talked about like the resources here and sort of like having what it takes to compete at the highest level with the big boys. And I sort of took what he said in his early press conferences as much as an opportunity for him to make a play for maybe them to beef up some support in certain areas beyond the rev share so that they're in that like inner circle of programs that sort of have the most capital, I guess, to spend. And so I think that was accomplished because of the Penn State thing. And that probably helped with the contract extension and all that. But yeah, it was definitely a real thing that we were tracking very closely for reasons everyone gets. But I also know that his wife started a business here, Julie, and they just feel comfortable in their skin in this town where even though he's not from this area, people have treated them really well, even when things haven't gone great on certain weekends. So I think it would have been tough for him to leave a group of guys, especially like your Dylan Raiola's, your Ja'Cory Barneys. Some of these guys are 2 or 3 years into the program where he challenged them to do tough stuff, right? Like, hey, take on this mission with me. And I know that could be naive and you'd say, yeah, coaches say that all the time to guys and then leave. But I think it would have been very tough for him with this particular batch of guys to leave if he felt like the resources were good here and everything. And so they are. And so he's staying.
Nebraska had 6 consecutive seasons under 500 that ended last season. They went 7-6. This year, obviously, that they're going to check that off the box again at 7-3. And so talk about expectations versus reality. You're coming off the first winning season in a while there in Lincoln. You've got a quarterback in place who's going into year 2 with Dylan Raiola. Matt Rule's got more foundation under his feet there. So how have the expectations compared to reality? This is a team that started off the season 5-1. They were ranked in the top 25 for the first time in quite some time. Then they had that loss at Minnesota, 24-6, as I referenced. Where are we in the process at 7-3 now?
They're about where people expected before the season. So the common prediction, like at least half the fan base, when you would ask, well, what's your record call for the year for the regular season, they would say 8-4. So right now, 7-3. These are 2 big games for Nebraska with Penn State and Iowa to somehow get one of them, because I do think perception-wise it would sort of fit like, hey, that's 2 more wins than last regular season. They went 6-6. They ended up winning the Pinstripe Bowl to get to 7-6. But if they could bump that up a couple games, that would be seen as progress. Now, along the journey, there's been some weeks that have been tough. That Minnesota week was bad here, just like you could imagine. From the feedback you got on the board for what you were posting about Rule and Penn State. They gave up 9 sacks in that game, and no disrespect, I think Fleck builds a nice program, but Minnesota not a great team this year, and they've just sort of owned Nebraska. And so I think people have kind of gotten tired of certain teams that are more like in the middle of this league sort of getting the best of Nebraska. For the most part, Rule's starting to bump that up, and so people are excited. They're starting to win more of those games. And now I think after this year, if they can get to 8+, it's going to be all right. Let's make a run at this thing. You say you have the resources. Let's go for the CFP and be one of those teams. So I think we're entering that stage where the price of poker goes up a little bit as far as expectations. But for the most part right now, people, I would have to say, are like, it's not like they're overly impressed or doing cartwheels or anything, but it's probably on track with about how you guessed in August.
So Nebraska fell to Michigan back in September. That was their lone loss through the first 6 games of the season, a 3-point loss to the Wolverines. They lose that game that we mentioned at Minnesota. Their third loss of the year was November 1st against USC, a matchup that I was watching quite a bit of. And they were up in that game. They had a pretty significant advantage there. Raiola gets hurt, things dwindle. It ends up being a narrow loss to a ranked USC team. And so when you look at their wins, the 7 of them, 3 of those stacked up in non-conference play, Cincinnati, Akron, Houston Christian, they beat Michigan State, they beat Maryland, they beat Northwestern, and then last time out, they beat UCLA. What is their most impressive performance to you, whether it's in a win or in a loss? And would a win over this Penn State team in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night, to you, be their best victory thus far of 2025?
Yeah, I think it'd easily be their best victory. It's the most talented team they'll face. Understanding Penn State's 4-6, but as you guys know so well, they haven't quit on their season. I think Nebraska fans were kind of following Penn State from a distance, like with probably that fan hope, like maybe these guys are going to mail it in, and then you see them play that way against Indiana, and there was that conversation like, yeah, maybe that was what finally, knocks them out, where they gave it their all, but they're done now. And I think that people saw the fourth quarter last week and they're like, no, this is going to be tough. And obviously the odds makers think that as well. The best win right now, maybe it's Cincinnati in the opening week, which wasn't given as much credit when it happened. Cincinnati then started 7-1. They've since lost a couple, but Nebraska wins at the very end with an interception in the end zone to win by 3. I think one of their better performances, because it's a program I respect, and I think everybody in the Big Ten does, they know you're going to get a tussle from them, was Northwestern. Like they controlled a lot of that game. They got a really bad call on a review where the spot was like 3 feet off. But they ended up giving a touchdown to Northwestern on that, kind of turned the game in a weird way. And then Nebraska responded back with a counter punch. So I thought because of the adversity and sort of how that game played out, that might have been one of their best wins. But yeah, it's not a resume where you're going to look at it and be like, wow, they beat those guys. They just don't have that. Those opportunities have sort of been missed with Michigan and USC. I think they might have won the USC game had the Raiola injury not happen and disjointed things, but it did, and here they are. And so, yeah, this would be their best win, I think.
Let's dive into the quarterback conversation, Brian, because Raiola in year 2 as a starter, former 5-star recruit, huge pickup for Matt Rule in this Nebraska program a couple cycles ago. He was at 2,000 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, completing more than 72% of his passes. Guy that was pretty firmly the orchestrator of this offense, had it where they probably wanted to be in terms of guys being in sync on the same page. And then, boom, he goes out in that matchup. You turn to a freshman in TJ Lateef. Thus far, I mean, I'm just looking at his raw stats here, 85% completion rate, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's got 2 touchdowns on the ground as well. What did they lose with Raiola being sidelined, and what do we need to know about what Lateef is bringing to Happy Valley this Saturday?
Yeah, TJ has been really good, and so someone would go back to my last comment, say, well, why the Raiola injury disrupt the USC thing if this other guy's been so good? That was the one part where Lateef came in cold to that game mid-third quarter against a really good team and looked a little out of rhythm. He dropped the ball a couple times, a couple plays were left wanting, and so that was the one time where he looked sort of like a freshman. But every other time we've seen him, basically they played 2 crap teams in non-conference, and he lit it up. Like he threw it well, he ran it well. He's more mobile than all of us thought when they recruited him, and I think even the coaching staff realized. So he's got a little bit of a giddy up to his step when he runs it. Last game against UCLA, though, Tyler, he was as good as could be in a first start. And now he was in his like hometown because he's from that area. And I think there was a comfort level. Nebraska had more fans, than UCLA in the Rose Bowl and all this stuff. But they scored on every drive they had in the first half. And Dana Holgerson really found, I think, a play package that worked well for him. He'll run the zone read. He ran it on the first play of the game and got 14 yards. And I think it kind of sent a message to UCLA like, hey, that's on the table and it's going to be there. And so he does add that element, which Raiola did not. Raiola worked at being more mobile, but he's just not the same as like a TJ. And I don't want to make him out like he's Michael Vick or anything, but he can move, and they'll utilize him in the run. And obviously that's going to help Emmett Johnson, who's having a great season too, when you have that dynamic of a QB who could pull it and take it himself.
Muted myself there for a moment. Yeah, speaking of Emmett Johnson, obviously I kind of buried the lead when we're talking about Nebraska's offense because he has been the MVP of that unit. I know that I've seen that some of their official counts maybe pushing out little Heisman buzz for Emmett Johnson out there in Lincoln, which I can understand why they want to do that. He's got 3 consecutive games over 120 rushing yards, 6 games on the season over 100 yards. Collectively, he's over 1,100 yards with 11 touchdowns, averaging more than 5.5 yards per carry. What has gone well for Johnson, and how important is it for him to stay with that momentum in this matchup, considering you've got Latif, who I want to say is a true freshman, not a redshirt freshman. Yeah. He's a true freshman going on the road to Beaver Stadium this weekend. And how key is it going to be that the Emmett Johnson show continues for another week?
It has to for them to win. Emmett's going to get the ball 30 times. Penn State knows it. Nebraska has been doing that like the last 3 or 4 games. And they'll give it to him 25 times rushing. They'll throw it to him like 5 times. Like that's just going to be the deal. He's very slippery, and he's become a good back. The best back here was recently, and you'd have to go back to 2014, was Amir Abdullah. And he's got some of that to his game where there'll be at least 2 or 3 plays where it's not even well blocked, should be a no gainer, and he's able to get 7 or 8 out of it. Like he's just tough to get to the ground. It's also why he's durable. People don't get a lot of clean hits on him. Like he's sort of just the way he maneuvers his body, he protects himself very well. So yeah, he's been one of the best backs in the country. That's fair. Like the Heisman campaign, I know some would snicker at that because it is such a long shot. I think that is a good thing for Nebraska because it's a message to your team and recruits like, hey, we've got this guy, kind of an old school player who's actually in the program for a 4th year who just kind of built until he got to this season. And so there's a good reason to like highlight that. But he does have the 3rd most all-purpose yards in the country. And if you put his numbers side by side with Jeremiah Love, Love's got like more yards per attempt, but everything else stacks up pretty well. And Emmett Johnson represents like 37% of the offensive yardage in this team. So that's how big a deal he's going to be. There's half the season was spent around here talking about who's running back too. Like Nebraska doesn't have a second running back. And then at some point, like in the last few weeks, people are like, who cares really right now who is running back to? But if it does get to that, we don't know a lot about the guys behind Emmett because it's just always Emmett who's been out there, and he's going to be out there as long as he can go this season.
We'll see. Penn State has had some low moments against the run this year. Been a bit better and overall much better defensively the last 2 games of action. We'll see if that sustains against Nebraska and a young quarterback. But Emmett is certainly a guy that we're going to be all watching closely on Saturday, and Jim Knowles above all. When you talk about this Nebraska defense, one thing we were discussing a bit on Monday in our last podcast episode was how Penn State's really rolling on the ground game right now, led by Katron Allen. They want to lean on it. They want it to be their identity down the stretch here. And I noticed that Nebraska's 14th right now in Big Ten rankings against the run defensively. Is that a weakness, or is that more just how teams have elected to attack them? What can you tell us about kind of the perceived strengths and the potential Achilles heels perhaps going up against Penn State?
It's a semi-weakness. It's they've gotten better against the run, and actually the numbers don't necessarily show it as much because teams are reluctant to throw it on them. They have a very good pass defense, but also it has been proven you can eventually break the dam against Nebraska's defense with an explosive running it. The biggest thing, though, that's dented them really, Tyler, is the QB run as much as anything. Now, Michigan was a different animal. They found some things, and like Justice Haynes, when he was healthy, then he ripped off as like a 70-yarder, and the Marshall had a 54-yarder. And so that has been a weakness. Minnesota got a 70-yard run on Nebraska. So that's the thing I think this fan base is a little wary of, is they feel like this defense can stop a offense for maybe sorry, I get choked up talking about it. It's just emotional, talking about this running. But they feel like they can stop a run offense maybe 4 or 5 plays, but then it's that one that just pops, that gets you where a safety misses his spot or whatever, takes a bad angle. So that's hurt them. And so I'm sure Penn State is going to beat on that drum and be patient with it like they were last week, but especially against this defense, and say, hey, maybe even if it doesn't pop right away in the first or second quarter, the history of this season shows that eventually one of those breaks.
You mentioned the QB run maybe hurting Nebraska a bit. I think Penn State very hesitant. I think they're directing their quarterback to say, don't take off or avoid contact when you can, because the last couple of weeks, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but wide receiver Liam Clifford has essentially been their QB2 because of some injuries elsewhere on the depth chart. So I think they've been particularly cautious with Ethan Grunkemeyer when it comes to using his legs and getting down as soon as possible, maybe not having some of those extended runs that otherwise they would be utilizing. Let's finish here. Tell me, by the way, 10-point spread last I checked. That may have changed since then, but Penn State favored by a couple scores at home as a 4-6 team against the 7-3 Nebraska squad. So I'm curious, Nebraska reverses that and comes away with a win in Beaver Stadium if Nebraska struggles in this setting, and ultimately, where do you see the score prediction?
Nebraska wins if that run defense is actually plays its most durable game of the year and just keeps the explosives in check. Like, they can live with Penn State, knocking out like an occasional 10 or 12 play drive where they have to really work for it, and they have like 2 of those. But if they can avoid like 1 or 2 of those plays where it's just like a 65-yard house call, then I think Nebraska will be there till the end. That's a big if. And then, of course, it's young TJ. You wonder, like, it's one thing to do it at UCLA when it's sort of a favorable crowd. It's going to be in the 30s, I think, temperature-wise or something like that on Saturday night, and the noise will be the most difficult they've had to deal with. They've been, of course, pumping it in all week here in Lincoln, trying to get ready for it. But how does he deal with communicating in that, and can he avoid a colossal mistake maybe connected to that? That Nebraska wins if that, and then they lose if basically switch those 2 viewpoints around that I just said, and if they go Penn State's way, I think it's a long day. The wild card, Tyler, is special teams. Nebraska's completely turned that around under Mike Eckler, who had been at Tennessee and been one of the best in the country there. He's brought that mindset to this unit, and so they are a group that is going to hunt that game-changing play, and they're capable of it. They have a kick return for a touchdown. They have some punt returns that are top 15 in the country, so that's something to be mindful of. That's been a good part of Nebraska this year.
And do you have a score prediction for us?
I'll say a 1-score game, but Penn State, I think let's go. I like weird scores. 22-17. We'll give Penn State 22, Nebraska 17. It could even be lower scoring than that. I don't know. I just think this is going to be kind of a rock fight with minimal possessions, and it's really going to come down to like who's better in the red zone and who can finish off some of those drives. But I'll say Nebraska covers the spread that is pretty high, but doesn't get the win.
Brian, look forward to having you in our territory this weekend. We hope to welcome you into the press box. Yeah. If you need any help along the way, navigating your way from Pittsburgh, we appreciate it. We'll be there for you. But it's always good to have some colleagues from the 24/7 Sports Network in Happy Valley. Appreciate you jumping on the podcast. Brian does great work breaking down the Cornhuskers within our 24/7 Sports Network. Take care, man.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
That's going to wrap up this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. I know we threw a lot your way. Thanks to Brian Christopherson for breaking down the Cornhuskers, and a big thanks to Mark and Daniel for helping us preview this and get some things off the practice field and here onto the podcast. And just to reiterate what we learned during the recording with Mark and Daniel, very appreciative of anyone and everyone who is a part of our Lions 24/7 community at an all-time high for subscriptions right now. We are motivated to build upon that, but impossible without you. For those of you who've been around for a long time, through the 0-5 start during the 2020 COVID season, through some notable staff changes that we had in 2022, and through what has really been a roller coaster ride here in 2025. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are newer to the party, we appreciate you too. We're just getting started, and we hope to earn your trust over the next weeks, months, years, hopefully, at Lions247.com. For now, stepping aside, we'll be back in Beaver Stadium on Saturday. I'm Tyler Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.